Well, good evening. Welcome to the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission. Can we start off with a roll call?
Dustin Allred.
Here.
Thomas Delgado. Madeline Carbaz.
Here.
Stacy Gloss. Megan McGinty. Andrew Stump.
Here.
Morgan White.
Here.
Unfortunately, this evening we did not publicly announce or post the meeting agenda and packet, so unfortunately we'll not be able to have an official meeting tonight. So we'll still have the presentations, but no other work will be done tonight. Thank you.
So you can close it. Yeah, go ahead and close the
Close the
meeting.
meeting.
So the presentations are not on the TV?
They'll be recorded
Okay.
by UPTV, and we'll make them available to members
Okay.
at another time.
For those of you, you can hear me, I don't, yeah, it's no problem. For those of you who don't know me. You really? Hello? Okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dominique Gilbert. I'm just a short introduction. I work in my day job for a research arm of the Army Corps Engineers. I work primarily on waste-related issues, so anything to do with garbage really makes me happy. But for my extracurricular activities, I work in support as president for a newly formed nonprofit called CCES, which stands for Champaign County Environmental Stewards. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work to raise awareness about hard-to-manage household wastes. So I'm briefly going to just talk about who, what, how we are. So it's a very short presentation. What we do, we maintain an education and outreach website for the Champaign County, and we work to raise funds towards improving collection options in the county. Why we do this? Well, there have been very few, it began out of a need for an increased number of collection events for household hazardous waste. So, for example, between the years 2012 and 2019, there was one collection events for household hazardous waste, and that took place a few months ago in 2019. So that's 7 years without any way for people to appropriately dispose of their household hazardous waste. Despite the fact that the county applied for funds to sponsor one, they did it without success. And it's very hard for people to plan on appropriate disposal of household hazardous waste when the events happen very rarely and very infrequently. So because of this, the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, through the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center, formed a study between 2013 and 2016, and they formed a group and that met to try to address this issue. And one of the solutions that they came up with, recommendations, was to form a leadership team and a nonprofit to raise awareness and recommend options for hard-to-manage household waste. Thus, in 2019, the solution to this was CCES, for which we are talking here. And we started with the mission to support efforts to provide Champaign County area citizens with a safe and convenient way to dispose of household hazardous waste. And we are not limited to just household hazardous waste, but we are primarily focusing on that, and some of those wastes are carpeting, batteries, containers that contain cleaning fluids, anything toxic. Plastics will be a push of ours, plastics in general, not just necessarily containers with toxic materials, e-waste, mattresses, and anything else that falls under categories that are hard to dispose of. We are just newly formed. As I said, it was April 2019, and so we have planned one event for this year coming up in July, and I'll discuss that in 1 second. But we are also going to work in support of a household hazardous waste collection event that is going to happen again April 4th to 20, so that's obviously in 1 month. And our first event is going to be at Pachakacha, which is their lightning talks, and ours will focus on waste-related and environmental impacts issues. So our target date is mid-July. We haven't determined the exact date yet, and this is all to be determined, but we will post it on our website, so if anyone here is interested or want to get the word out or want to talk and present, they are more than welcome to. And for donations or any information related to what we do, please go to our website, which is www.ccenvstew.com, so ccenvstew.com. And your donations will go to help waste-related issues in Champaign County. So I would say, do you have any questions? But I know you can't ask any, so that concludes my short talk. So more to come, I guess, later this year when we have more to talk about. So, did I give everyone a card here? Sure.
I might just add the website is intended to be a central resource for the entire county, all the municipalities that don't know what's going on, that outline.
Yeah.
Any updates on Youth Sustainability Summit? Yeah.
So there's been a lot of crazy things. I did attend the last meeting, and Morgan was there. I do not believe we have officially decided on a date set for the event. Committees have been narrowing in on, say, the activity that we're talking about is going to happen afterwards, because the goal is to empower people of the youth, and then have a project of some sort to fulfill that in a way. So it's really a bunch of different groups. So there's the marketing group, the agenda, the activities. So right now we're focusing on the agenda and the activities. They've decided they're going to work together more, so that the agenda focuses on and works with what the activity is. And then we're talking about T-shirts. That was a big thing at the last meeting. And it's kind of more just narrowing down, we have the broad strokes, and it's more narrowing down.
We did select a date,
Oh, you did? I'm so sorry.
April 18.
Sorry.
We've got a couple of short presentations as well. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where this is saved. So I have some additional metrics that we've been able to collect and distill, and I've got them in this drafted annual report, which many of you are familiar with the format. And so I just want to share some of that that has been added. Unfortunately, I still don't have, I think maybe I have all of the actual data for calendar year 2019 now, but I don't have it all analyzed and organized and ready to present. So I'm still working on the community-wide greenhouse gas accounting. So this chart shows 2017, but it will eventually show 2019. Come to think of it, I don't have all of the municipal electric aggregation data from Q4 of 2019 yet. So in part, that's why I'm not finished with that. This greenhouse gas facilities, let's see if I can change this view. This chart won't change because we won't be doing that that inventory this year. We'll be doing it next year. This is mostly done, except I typically have a little side story here. But you can see we had another decline in community water consumption, and we also had a decline in total water per capita per day, and a probably statistically insignificant decline in residential per capita per day. We already have pretty low residential per capita per day number consumption compared to the rest of the country. So it's interesting to see it continue to decline because there's really not a lot more gains to be made. Although I'm sure there are some shower heads and toilets in older homes that are going to get swapped out from time to time with newer models that are more water efficient. Say again? Oh, do they? City consumption, facilities consumption of water also declined. I don't have a cause for that, but well, actually, one potential cause is that there is typically irrigation at the Civic Center. That facility's been closed, but I don't know if that means they aren't irrigating or not. But that's one potential cause. Waste data is complete, but I haven't updated the charts yet. Recycling coordinator Courtney Kwong has gotten me that data, but I haven't had a chance to update it. I did update the battery recycling, had a little decline in battery recycling this year. Hopefully that means people are using more rechargeables and generating less per year. Rechargeables are great for us also. When we get pricing for battery recycling, we get pricing for every single type of battery, and the more expensive and toxic the battery chemistry, actually more likely we're going to get paid to give that up for recycling. Whereas the single-use alkaline batteries, which are legal to put in the landfill, we have to pay out for. And then there's some rechargeable and specialty batteries that are kind of in the middle. We don't pay too much, or it's zero, or they pay us a little bit. But some of the rechargeable batteries we get paid for. It doesn't overcome the cost of the single-use batteries that we have to pay, and then there's also a delivery charge and materials charge. So we're always going to be paying for battery recycling, but the more rechargeables we use, the less we can spend on that service. This is one that we're not going to be doing. Nuisance is in community development now, so I'm not going to be reporting on that. And there was one here that I meant to put in, but it's not in here. It is, tree data. That's too bad it's not in there. I do have street tree data ready. We have genus and species. What I've done is tracked the most common genus and species, like the top 5, over time. I think I have like 5 years of data in. That's important because we are working to diversify our street tree profile. So we don't want any family more than 30% of the total number of street trees, and we have no family that is over 30%. We don't want any genus that's over 15%, and we do have one or two that is just a little over 15%. It's Acer, it's maple. And then we don't want any species over 5%, and we have one or two that is over 5%, and it's silver maple and probably sugar maple or something like that. So we're getting close. What the charts will show you when I have next time is all those trends are moving in the right direction. So we are spreading our bets and increasing the diversity of our street trees, our urban forest, for which we manage. I had intended to also incorporate landscape recycling center data, but the data has been collected and managed in the past for purposes of retailing. It's a retail operation, and for purposes of reporting to Illinois EPA. And so it's not really prepared for the type of reporting that I do in this document. And so that's going to take a lot of time to work on. And so that may not happen this year. We will see. But it's an ambition of mine to get that data in such a state that we can track generation of recycled products, or maybe disposal of compostable material. We'll see over time and follow those trends. Another presentation. I had mentioned in the past that we were registered with the ICLEI Cities with Nature program. This is a brand new best practice recognition, public engagement kind of program from ICLEI, our Sustainability Professional Association. And that has dovetailed with some other nature and urban biodiversity work that is going on globally. The Convention on Biodiversity is having another big convention this year, and also some potential developments and proposals that are happening at the university. And so Cities with Nature, I wanted to share a little bit about what that's about, but also just speak a little bit broader umbrella. First, this is going to be good timing in terms of the forthcoming comprehensive plan rewrite for the city of Urbana. This is an image from the existing 2005 comprehensive plan. The city's hiring some help to lead that effort, probably starting very soon, if not immediately, and probably about a 2-year effort. And it's going to be what we have now in 2005 is a comprehensive land use plan. And what we're going to be replacing that with is a comprehensive city plan, which will include a land use plan, but a whole lot more chapters and sections on all the high-level, big picture, overarching needs and aspirations of the city. So just looking at what others have done, our plan might look something more like this, a little bit more modern styling. This is from Plano, Texas, their comprehensive plan. And you can see the different chapters are kind of broad-based, all-encompassing. I'm not saying that these are going to be our chapters, but it gives you a sense that this is clearly not just a comprehensive land use plan. I see squints, so I'll linger here for a second. So some of the concepts and frameworks that have been discussed and implemented for years, but also some new ones I've listed here. Green infrastructure tends to focus on managing stormwater in ways other than just piping it. Although some folks use the term green infrastructure for anything green or related to nature that serves some purpose in the city. So street trees to some people is green infrastructure because it's obviously green, it's a plant, and it is managed citywide by the municipality, and it provides service. It soaks up stormwater, it shades houses, it shades sidewalks, adds beauty and property value. Ecosystem services is kind of an econometric term, not real charming, but really useful way to think about the fact that the things that nature, that ecosystems do, provide us a real value. It's not market value. There's not necessarily an exchange of dollars, but economists will put value to the services that, say, shading provides or stormwater management provides. And in that sense, the services that nature provides can be sort of normalized to the dollar, and that's a different way of thinking about it. Of course, you all know we've been participating in Midwest Grows Green. This is a Institute for Integrated Pest Management Institute program. They're promoting natural lawn care, so it's not nearly as all-encompassing as, say, ecosystem services or green infrastructure. It's really focusing on turf management, which is the #1 managed crop. You know, what's the statistic? Like the most widely planted crop in the U.S. is turf, and home owners use more pesticides per acre than farmers do, and they typically over-fertilize, and resulting in fertilizers that go down the drain and into our surface waters. So that's the problem that Midwest Grows Green is focusing on. We've done public engagement around natural lawn care for several years. We promote mow high, core air rate, and top dress with compost purchased from the Landscape Recycling Center. We also have committed the South Lawn at this facility to natural lawn care approach, and the Urbana Park District has committed the Canada baseball field to a natural lawn care approach. These are both kind of test pilots. We're hoping that we're going to find a set of practices that cultivates a strong, healthy, attractive turf with little or no synthetic chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers. And if we can find that set of practices, then we'll expand to other properties, park district likely, city likely. Urban biodiversity is a little bit newer framework. This is really about it's about reorienting our nature and ecosystem perspective to fit in the urban environment, urban human environment. We know that we get all these benefits, personal, economic, social, from green infrastructure ecosystem services, but if we're not careful and we just throw them all on the landscape, we end up suburbanizing the human habitat, and then we get all the problems that entails. So urban biodiversity is focusing on how do we maintain the best aspects of urbanism, proximity, convenience, interaction, but also support biodiversity in non-human species, and also support those other values that we gain from ecosystems and nature in the city. So that might look, that might look a little more structured and a little more engineered than, say, a suburban swale. But it's finding those solutions that fit into the city, and so I like that. I like that framework. And then Cities with Nature, this ICLEI program, they're developing a community of practice online. Probably will end up with some in-person community of practice exchanges. They have a best practice program, which I'll show you in a minute. And they are, I would say, fairly well oriented with urban biodiversity, although their framework is pretty expansive, and a city can take it in whatever direction that works for that city. So a few things that we are already doing in terms of that can fit in with any of those frameworks, maybe some better than others. One, we maintain a very extensive urban forest. This is an image from the third-party software we use to manage our urban forest called Tree Keeper. There is a publicly available access to this. The URL is urbana.mytreekeeper.com, and there you can, like any other digital map, zoom in, zoom out. You can click on any of these green dots, and that is an actual street tree that the city owns and manages, and it'll give you all the information about that tree, height, age, etc. This software also calculates the ecosystem services, the eco benefits as they call it, for each individual tree, and then collectively you can see $1.3 million in eco benefits from our urban forest here, including greenhouse gas benefits are calculated through their system, water, energy, etc. So this is a great tool, really powerful way to communicate the value of trees. Even has real estate value there, I guess, property benefits. So this is great and gives you a sense of, if you're doing asset management for a city, this is kind of the number you want to see. What's the total value or the replacement value? And then schedule your maintenance budget accordingly. So this is one of the big nature and cities aspects that we maintain in Urbana. We also support small-scale private property green infrastructure in a number of ways. Here we have the rain barrel sale that we do every year. Been doing that for 7 or 8 years. We're going to have another one this year. So we provide a $25 rebate for a rain barrel purchase in the city for residents who live in the city. We also provide some rebates for things like rain garden, cistern. We also, for commercial properties, will provide not just a one-time cash incentive, but a permanent reduction in stormwater utility fees for certain green infrastructure practices. Typically, we calculate those in terms of runoff rate reduction or runoff volume reduction. So if you're slowing water, or if you're capturing it permanently and infiltrating it on site, these are things that you can lower your stormwater utility fee for commercial property by implementing. I mentioned the Midwest Grows Green program. In our second year with that program, we were able to work with the Lumpkin Family Foundation and substantially grant fund the purchase cost of this compost top dresser. This is way, way more effective than a wheelbarrow and a shovel, I can assure you, because I've seen both. And this hopper and spreader spreads all of that compost from that hopper very evenly in a very short period of time. I don't know, it seemed like maybe it was 20 seconds or something. Very short period of time, and we were back at the truck filling it up again. So this is a great way to move a lot of compost, which most of it starts out as leaves collected either with street sweeper or with the city's curbside leaf collection provided by U-Cycle and the U-Cycle fee. That all becomes compost. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see the aerial image of the landscape recycling center. That becomes compost. We sell the majority of the LRC materials are sold to commercial landscape contractors, but the city is also a significant purchaser, and we want to move a lot of that onto our turf grasses instead of the synthetic fertilizers. So it's really a nice story that we're picking up leaves from Urbana and then composting them and then spreading them back on Urbana landscapes and really completing the cycle there. In the urban biodiversity category, I think our Broadway bioswale is a good example. We've got a number of native species and nativars, so native species that are cultivars have been bred typically for lower stature, shorter stature, so that they don't flop on the sidewalk. And also some species from outside of this area and maybe some exotic species, but nothing invasive. So we're taking in stormwater in this swale and infiltrating it into the ground rather than pushing it and charging into the gray infrastructure, the stormwater pipes. And something we did kind of a trial run for to support the library in some of our landscapes, such as this one that the city manages. The landscape crews collected, instead of chopping and composting, they collected the seed heads from a number of desirable species in our landscapes, and we shared those with the Urbana Free Library, because the Urbana Free Library is starting a seed sharing library. So they are going to maintain space where folks can donate seed, and they're going to take landscape seed as well as vegetable seed, and they're going to take that, curate it, manage it, and then it'll be available in the spring for folks to take and plant at their own properties. So what we were interested in was there are other things people can do with their right-of-ways, such as what we're doing here on Broadway. However, we don't want tall plants in the right-of-way, nothing over 24 inches. It's a safety issue, health and safety issue. But we're already managing a lot of nativars that have been cultivated to be shorter stature. And so that seed is out there. Now, whether through the breeding of these nativars, maybe some of the seed is not nearly as viable as, say, a native species, we don't know. But we'll find out, or folks using the seed will find out. So that was a really nice extra service that the landscape crews did this year, and I really appreciate them for that. So here is the Cities with Nature, nature pathway, as they call it. It's a best practice system, and you can see, familiar to all planning endeavors, commit, research, analyze, make goals, implement, monitor, repeat, rinse and repeat, that kind of thing. Expand, advocate. And so this is a nice service that is part of this Cities with Nature program. And so it's going to be a nice scorecard for us to compare ourselves against, and may lead to an exercise that might inform some chapter of the forthcoming comp plan. Don't know what it's going to look like, the comp plan, so there's no guarantees there, but could be something that the Sustainability Advisory Commission might want to work on, or a student project. I'm hesitant to volunteer my own time, not because not interested, but just because it's taxed. But it could be an interesting project for SAC or others. No questions. So we have another speaker who's scheduled to arrive in about 20 minutes. And so I think anyone can feel free to take a break and get some water.
Are you ready?
Take it away.
Oh, okay.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, got here on time. So, thanks for having me. I happened to be, Andy probably told you I was here in town anyway. Had to go to another event, 6 o'clock, so I got that one done. So, all great. So I knock out 2 presentations in one night with one trip. So, glad to be here. My name's John Freitag. I run the Geothermal Alliance of Illinois. Started the group back in 2008 for the geothermal heat pump industry. And actually, people ask me what my background is. I grew up in Wisconsin and moved here in '85. I'm a journalism communications person by background, but I ditched that a long time ago and sort of became a renewable energy guy. And I worked for the electric co-ops for 33 years, retired exactly 3 years ago. And I just decided to run this trade group, continue running it, basically. I'd started it back in 2008. So the global headquarters of the GAOI is in youngest son's old bedroom in our house. We're empty nesters now. So my commute is real good. I wear out carpet slippers. And so we have a conference next week, and we have a speaker from the group here who's going to present at our conference. And so if any of you are interested, feel free to be my guest and come for part or all or whatever. Just let me know that you're coming so I can kind of get you on the count, but we'll be glad to host you. And so with that, Andy asked me about this a month or so ago, and I really wasn't certain of what the group's collective knowledge of geothermal heat pump technology was. So I said, do we need to start with a geothermal 101? And so I decided, let's just start with a quick geothermal 101, and we'll kind of run through things, and it'll be the real high-level view from 30,000 feet, and I'm going to really go fast through it so we don't keep you guys. And then the real meat of what you asked me to come over and do, I think, is probably the last 8 or 10 slides. Does that sound okay? Okay. So just so you know, I am a believer in geothermal heat pumps. The place I worked for all those years has solar and geothermal on it. My old office, I did 2 solar arrays, one 6 years ago, the other one about 4 years ago. And solar takes care of, it's an all-electric building, of course, electric utility building. And solar took care of about 35% of the energy needs of that facility, and we had 20 tons of geothermal. All except one small part of that building was geothermal. We had one goofy little part where it would have been so expensive to do geo, so we did an air source heat pump rooftop unit. It was really the only practical way to do it. Otherwise, it was all geothermal. That's been that way for over 30 years. I've had geothermal in my own home since 1999, and I work in my son's old bedroom, as I said before, and I sit about 6 feet away from my geothermal heat pump every day while I'm working. So I sort of believe in geothermal, obviously. I have just your typical type home in Springfield. Not net zero energy, but I've got a 28 panel rooftop array that I've had for, this fall will be 4 years. And so I need one more solar array, and I'll have a net zero energy home in a home that was built in 1961. So I mean, it's not a home that I tore right down to the studs and redid everything either. So it can be done with older homes, and my house is a good example of it. So you guys have to turn around to look at that, or you can see them on your. Okay, good. So obviously, this is going to be real common sense, but the Earth is basically nothing but a giant solar collector, and that's what geothermal heating and cooling does. It takes advantage of the sun's energy, which goes into the Earth, and the Earth is a constant, pretty much 55 degrees, and you see on those marks there, we are in the perfect part of the United States for geothermal heating and cooling. Central Illinois is just about perfect. And why is it just about perfect? Well, if you get down where things are brown and lighter colored, sandy colored, that's the Earth's temperature there. And if you think about it, that you've got warmer Earth temperatures, and you've got predominant, by far, cooling, overwhelming cooling load, not so much heating. So think about it. Geothermal looping is going to be very expensive. You're going to need a lot more of this in the ground to handle the cooling load, and you're not going to have much heating load. So most of the year is going to be cooling, always pumping heat into the ground. Likewise, you get up there where it's real dark blue beyond northern Minnesota, geothermal technology works fine. You just need to make sure that you've got the heat exchange in the ground, enough loop field to take care of that heat load. Here in central Illinois, just perfect. We're about as close as you get to 50-50 here. Maybe 60-40. 60% heating, 40% cooling. That's what I think we are right here. That's not bad. That's perfect. So all winter long, we're taking heat out of the ground and bringing it into the home or business. And then in the summer, we reverse and send heat down into the ground. And it just goes back and forth and back and forth. So we can probably get away with 1/3 of the loop field that you could in southern Texas, where it's so hot. And we've got the soils, and this is just perfect for heat exchange for geothermal heat pumps in this part of the country. All that makes sense? Good? And just interrupt if you have questions or you want to make a comment. So most of this stuff is real. I slimmed this down a little bit, and this Geothermal 101 for the most part is when I talk to like a community group or a group of potential homeowners who are looking at geothermal. So that's what this is. Pretty simple stuff, and nice pictures though. And this just explains what I just said. And so geothermal circulates water or fluids through a loop field. And if you've never seen one, this is basically what a vertical loop field looks like. This is a model. This would be a 3-hole, typically like what I would call, people in the biz would call a 3-ton loop field, 3 200-footers. This would be your typical 2,200 square foot. It would be exactly this, 3 boreholes, 175 to 200 feet deep. It's exactly what I have in my front yard. Mine are 175 feet, 3 of them. Takes care of my house. Exactly, looks almost exactly like this, except a lot longer and bigger pipe. 2-inch, or 1.5 to 2-inch pipe. So this is just a model, okay? Geothermal has been around a long time. Can you read the date on that, Life magazine? 1948. They did I think they called it the fireless furnace, and some brilliant, maybe semi-crazy person invented the geothermal heat pump, like fireless furnace, and they were onto something, and so, it's kind of a low-tech version of what we have today, but the concept was the same. So it's been around actually a long, long time. I know the first geothermals that I knew of were in the late 70s in western Illinois over by Quincy. I know the people who put them in, and the loop fields still exist today and still work perfectly fine. So geothermal really isn't new, but they've learned a lot. Some of the early loop fields, they used metal pipes, iron pipes. That was a fiasco, but they didn't know any better. They didn't have the products, that they had to learn. But they determined now HDTP pipe is the way to go, and for all intents and purposes, this stuff lasts forever. The enemy of this would be an earthquake, and if we had an earthquake that ate up these loop fields, I think we probably got bigger fish to fry. And occasionally in some geologies, not ours, you'll have problems with rock, and usually it's installation issues in tough geology. I'll hear of stuff like that. Around here, that stuff's bulletproof. Oops, I think I went too. So I want to talk about a little bit about the heat pumps. So your typical geothermal system does not use any kind of fossil fuel. Some might use, in a dual fuel capacity, they might use a gas furnace for backup heat. A typical installation might be, let's say that one of you had a gas furnace and a central air conditioner, and you wanted to put geothermal in your house, and you had a gas furnace that was perfectly good. You might keep your gas furnace in place and use that for your backup heat source. Be perfectly fine. Probably wouldn't be the way to go in most applications if you had to put in a brand new gas furnace to work for backup heat, but if you had it there anyway and it was perfectly fine. So that, for the most part, you eliminate your fossil fuels like gas furnace and gas water heater, and you convert your home to being essentially an all-electric home. And in a geothermal system, think about this in terms of 4 distinctly separate and unconnected circuits. Okay? The first circuit is the distribution system, and that's basically for most houses, ducting, like this right here. Ducting that sends air through the home. If you have a radiant heat home, it would be the pipes that are installed in the floor. So it could be fluids, or it could be a water to air distribution circuit for ducts. So that's system 1. System 2 is the refrigerant circuit. That's what's inside the geothermal unit, which looks very much like a gas furnace with two pipes connected to it. Essentially, that's what they look like. But inside that box is a refrigerant sealed circuit that's completely isolated and separate from everything else. That's circuit number 2. Frankly, that's where all the magic happens. Circuit number 3 is this ground loops circuit, this one right here. And that's completely separate from the other two. And then the fourth one, which isn't on all systems, but should be, is the hot water circuit, and that's where you take what's called a desuperheater, which basically takes the small amount of waste heat off of the geo unit, and there's plenty of waste heat when you're in cooling mode, because you're just injecting that heat into the ground, so you may as well take advantage of it to make free hot water. And I can tell you in my house, I have a 75-gallon, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but at one time I had kids at home. I have a 75-gallon water heater that will last forever, and it never runs. My geothermal system takes care of virtually all of my hot water needs in my house, but there's just 2 of us living there, and so how much water do we use at this stage of the game? So these systems are very efficient, and when you eliminate domestic hot water, that's usually the second largest requirement of energy in a home. That's pretty significant, and that's a free byproduct. Any questions about those 4 separate circuits? A lot of people ask questions, you can't ask questions, but a lot of people ask questions because they think that the refrigerant and the fluid in the ground all intermingles, and none of it intermingles. They're 4 completely isolated separate circuits, okay? That's kind of important to remember. All right? I'm going to skip by some of these. This one is kind of interesting. If somebody were to ask you if you had a dollar bill and you wanted to exchange your dollar bill for a $5 bill, of course you'd take it. And that's essentially what geothermal does. It's an expensive system to put in, but for every dollar that you spend in energy, you get $5 in heating and cooling back. This is how equipment is measured. You've heard of SEER, S-E-E-R, Seasonal Energy Efficiency Ratio. There's no SEER with geothermal. It's just EER because there's no season. The ground is your exchange. The ground knows no season. It's not that much different in the winter underground than it is in the summer. And your COP is how you measure heating. So this just graphically gives you a bit of idea of the efficiencies of the new geothermal equipment. So the new systems have EERs above 30, north of 30, and you can see how that compares to conventional equipment. Pretty much double on the cooling side, but where geothermal really shines is on heating. And that's where the efficiency really comes in. And you can see these new systems now, the top of the line systems are 5.0 COPs. I know in my own house, my original equipment was a water furnace, single stage, single everything. It was either on or it was off. And that thing was bulletproof. I had it for 18 years. I should have put that one in the Hall of Fame. Never had a service call on it, not one time. I replaced it 2 years ago, not because there was anything wrong with the old one, but I replaced it because I could, and I wanted one with more bells and whistles and variable speed everything and variable speed flow centers, and it would tell me all the technology. And I also thought, my wife and I are going to probably live in this home about another 10 years, and then we're going to be at the point where we're going to be ready to downsize. And I'm like, that would be almost 30 years for that old unit. It probably isn't going to make it. I said, I'm just going to change it out while the changing is good. And so we did. So I've got a system now that has about a 4.0 COP, not the very top of the line, but pretty doggone good. And you can see how it compares to everything else. So in terms of efficiencies, nothing else is even close. Okay? So these are the different loop types. When I said, you know, a vertical closed loop field, this in Illinois is probably, Andy, you think I'm about right here, maybe about 80% of the loop fields I think, are about vertical loop fields like this, like the one I have in my house. And the rest are a combination of horizontal loop fields, which are fine if you live out in the country, you have plenty of lot, plenty of ground. Occasionally, if you have a big pond, you might have a pond loop. But for the most part, this is what you have, this vertical closed loop field. And so your fluids never leave that loop. They just make the trip around and back up to your home or business. They never leave. These are rare, where you'll see water well open loops. There are some around here. There's actually a couple that I know of over by Mahomet, and there are a few here and there. Where these are really common are in river towns. So like Rockford has a ton of these applications, right downtown Rockford, where you where you put in a couple of large wells, and the water table is, 3 feet underground, you hit water, and you put in a large well, you take water out of the ground, take the heat out of it, or inject the heat into it in the summer, and then inject it into the river, which is perfectly fine. You're not doing anything that water except adding about 6 degrees in the summer and taking about 6 degrees out in the winter. So that's that application. You don't see too many of them. It's pretty much in river towns. Horizontal loops, again, if you live out in the country, if you're a farmer, you have plenty of property, this is common, and I'm going to get to it here in a second. This is what it looks like in application. Slightly different, but the same idea. You're typically digging a 5 or 6 foot trench and installing the loops in there. Same as this, only sideways, just under the ground. They work perfectly fine. You need more loop in the ground with a horizontal than you do with a vertical. Personally, when I talk to people, and I talk to people all the time who are putting geothermal in, I say, I like vertical loop fields. It costs a little bit more money, but you never hear of anybody digging up a vertical loop field. But you do hear about digging up horizontal loop fields once in a while, and that makes for a very bad day, an expensive day. So I said, for my money, just go ahead and do this and you're done with it. This is getting very popular, where you see directional boring machines. They're out putting in fiber optics and things like that. You'll see them around town. They also use that for installing geothermal loop fields now, and they're getting very, very common. And the handy part is, for a contractor, if they go out and have the money to invest in a boring machine, and typically, like the one there, that's going to be a $300,000 or $400,000 machine, so you have to keep it busy. But the contractor can put in their own loops, which is nice if they have the volume, because when you put in vertical loops, you have to subcontract that out to a drilling company that does nothing but that. So if you have the flexibility of having your own people doing it, you can do it whenever you want without having to worry about subcontracting it out. But that's the directional boring machine. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a directional boring machine. I've actually operated them. They're pretty cool toys. But you actually can make those pipes. You could be a block away, and you could make those pipes pop up right there in a hole in the ground. It's just like magic. I mean, you can be within a foot, and just exactly like what that looks like. They're amazingly accurate. They're incredible technology. And so there's your typical vertical loop field. When you have that borehole, you drop these pipes down into the ground. They actually go pretty fast when they go in the ground. And then there's no backfill here. That's probably a 5-inch borehole there. And then you backfill that loop field with a bentonite grout. And there's all different kinds of grout now, a lot of technology that's developed, high efficiency grouts that improve the heat transfer drastically. And of course, all this stuff costs more money, but you get more bang for your buck out of that borehole. You get more energy out of it. But they have to be grouted legally, and the main reason is because you don't want to have contamination of the aquifer. That's essential. And the Department of Public Health in Illinois regulates loop field installation, and it's carried out by county health departments. So at our conference, we do training for county health departments. In fact, I think there's somebody coming from Champaign County to our session, and we train the inspectors on basically a little bit of what we're doing here tonight, and then, how to properly regulate and inspect the loop installation. That's actually the bottom. That's a new version of this, the U-bend at the bottom of the bore field. That's actually what a vertical loop installation looks like. Those guys aren't being very neat. And that's how many people it takes to put in a vertical loop field. It takes a lot of folks, a lot of labor. Actually, this was a training session, and a guy I used to work with, they had a field day at his house, and everybody's just standing around with their hands in their pockets. They're just learning about loop field installation. That was a house in Springfield. This is a pond loop. It's essentially what they look like. Again, you don't see that many of them, but if you lived out in the country and had plenty of property and had a nice big pond, that would be a perfectly great place to save some money. You don't have to put it in the ground, put it in the pond. Same thing here. That's what a rack of loops, this is a big, obviously a big commercial array that's going in this pond. So we're getting to the heat of it now. Now we're getting to the important stuff. So why is geothermal heat pumps still a relatively niche product in the United States? Well, obviously it costs more to put in. For starters, you have your loop field, and loop field installation in this part of the country is pretty cost effective. Your typical loopers around this part of the country, I don't know about any of your projects at the university, but for like residential looping, Central Illinois, $1,100 a ton, $1,200 a ton for a single, for a 200-footer. It's pretty competitive, and the drilling is really easy here because our geology is just perfect for geothermal. And you get into Chicago, where the geology gets tougher and there's not nearly as much competition, and there's just so much more hassle because yards are tight and there's traffic and everything else. It's just all a headache up there. And looping costs will be anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500 a ton, 2 to 3 times as much as it is here, which makes it that much less competitive, harder to advance. So initial cost is one thing. The technology, hard to believe since it's been around as long as it has that it's not better known, but the technology really is kind of hard to understand for most people, and it's misunderstood. We do get a bad rap from some in the engineering community and the HVAC community, and in my world, usually that's people like heating, cooling contractors, mechanical contractors, the ones who will talk geothermal down. Usually they're contractors who don't do it. And so to them, they'll communicate that it doesn't work. And rather than just saying, yeah, it's fine, we just don't do it, they don't say that. Same way with engineers. Engineers who are advocates and really understand it, they just love it, and that's what they do. They specialize in it. I talk to those people all the time. Engineers that don't do it, they talk it down and say it doesn't work. So you hear all the time from school administrators, yeah, we thought about that geothermal when we retrofitted and we needed air conditioning in our schools, but we didn't do it because our engineer says it doesn't work. We hear that all the time. So it's kind of frustrating. And lastly, you hear a discussion about heat pumps not working. And heat pumps in the 70s and 80s really got a bad name, mostly air source heat pumps, because they often just didn't heat very well. And so I'll bet you all know somebody who had one of those old air source heat pumps, and their house was cold, and they always said, oh, cold air comes out of it. And so they equate that with a geothermal heat pump, and it's just maybe not fair, but it is what it is. So what works to encourage business and homeowners to consider geothermal? And these are the things that are the drivers and that actually work. On the commercial side, there's accelerated depreciation, and that probably more than anything else drives a commercial decision for geothermal. The accelerated depreciation, the fact that they can take that total write-off in year one, that's really important. And it's just amazing to me, because it's not my world, but it's amazing to me in business how short-sighted business people often are. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but people who are business managers or work in the corporate world, and especially in like manufacturing or something, they have to see that their decision, they don't make 10 and 15-year decisions. They make 2 and 3-year decisions at the most. And so geothermal isn't that. You have to be a little more far-sighted. You have to see the long game to see the payback. But tax credits help. There's a 10% investment tax credit. That helps a great deal. Probably not as good an incentive as accelerated depreciation, but important. Utility rebates are important. So at our conference next week, Ameren, which is the local utility that serves here in Champaign-Urbana, around Springfield as well, not in Springfield, but around Springfield. Ameren is going to be at our conference for the first time in years. And we used to work really well with them, and then they got away from geothermal. But they're going to be at our conference, and they're going to announce new geothermal incentives in the commercial space. And their incentive is going to be $500 a ton, which is pretty robust for this part of the world. That's not bad. I think that's a nice incentive. A lot of people in our industry would like it to be more. I'm like, don't be greedy. That's a pretty nice incentive, because geothermal's pretty competitively priced in our region here, and I think that's a nice starting point. So I'm pretty happy with that. I understand they are not going to yet announce residential incentives for geothermal, but they're considering them. And I've been told by the folks I know on the inside at Ameren that when that happens, they want them all to be a consistent incentive level. So $500 a ton seems to be what they're thinking about. So just FYI, you heard it here first. But you will hear about it next week over at our show. And so that's a nice thing. That's a big win for us. We're pleased with it. And then obviously the reduced cost. For most businesses or homeowners, you're going to cut your cost of operation for heating and cooling. It's going to be at least, you're going to cut it in half, and probably by 2/3. And that's just the facts of the game. That's just the way it works. These systems are so efficient now, and they're just so good. I like to tell that in my own house during the polar vortex, remember that, the polar vortex? It was 18 below at my house, and I had the new system in my house, so with all the bells and whistles, so I could really see what it was doing. I remember that morning I was home, and I went downstairs, and I'm like, boy, I wonder if, and I got 4 meters in my basement. I separately metered everything because I'm an energy geek, and I'm like, boy, if I was ever going to run backup heat, it's going to be this morning. It was 18 below. Not only did I not run any backup heat, my system never got out of low stage. It ran in low stage, which is the most efficient way for it to run. It ran on low stage, never kicked into second stage, ran low stage, and my incoming water temperatures that morning got down to 43 degrees, which seems cool. That's actually very good. I expected them to be well into the 30s. And then remember the polar vortex was like Wednesday, Thursday. Remember by the weekend it warmed up. It was like 50 degrees. It was kind of weird. By the weekend, my incoming water temperatures were back in the 50s. My loop field is really good. And so that's kind of the way it works. They're real good. Anyway, on the residential side, you got tax credits, utility rebates, lower operating costs, benefits to being green. Somebody like me, I just want to be green-minded. I believe in that stuff. I want to help do my part. I don't want to waste things. And I'm not big on being the first on my block, although I was the first on my block, but that's not important to me. But I think that is important to some people. So what is happening around the country in regard to geothermal and other technology that hasn't gotten to the Midwest yet? And I apologize if you know all this stuff, but I doubt that all of you know all this stuff, because if you read Midwest Energy News and U.S. Energy News every day, then you know this stuff if you read it thoroughly. But there are some states that really have robust incentives for geothermal heat pumps now. New York is number one. New York is really where this is all happening right now in the geothermal heat pump world. And there's a lot of things at play there, but they have just massive incentives through their state energy office in New York. And they are really driving things, and the utilities as well. And it's complicated, and I don't want to misrepresent what's going on in places like New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, but if you may have read a couple years ago, they had some really horrific, terrible natural gas line explosions where people were killed and blocks of homes destroyed, and really some bad problems in the natural gas business. And so there are huge swaths of New York, New Jersey, and places in New England that have moratoriums on natural gas extensions and natural gas pipelines. If you read in the trade press, in that part of the world, they have a shortage of natural gas pipeline capacity anyway, and they have a real problem getting those projects permitted. And there's a number of reasons for that, but I think building decarbonization, at the end of the day, for people who are like-minded and environmentally minded, we all realize that at the end of the day, if you want to do something about our environmental issues with CO2, it's going to be pretty hard to deal with that and not take fossil fuels out of buildings. I mean, it's 40% of our carbon issue in the United States. And what's the most efficient way to accomplish building decarbonization? That. It's not the only way, it's the only realistic energy efficient way. There is no other way. I mean, the holy grail in my world of building efficiency is weatherization, tightening buildings up, keeping the cold out, keeping the heat out, geothermal heat pumps, and solar. Everything else is small. Those are the big ones. Everything else is small. So there's really robust incentives going through state energy offices. In Illinois, we used to have a pretty robust state energy office at DCEO. We don't have one anymore. It got done away with back at a previous administration. Whatever remnants are left of state programs, and this isn't a political statement, are housed now at EPA and a little bit at DNR, but there just isn't much. There just isn't much of that left in Illinois. So it is what it is. Commerce Commission regulates. So pretty much all that has been farmed out to the public utilities, just the way it is. Not necessarily bad, just different than a state like New York. You know, again, I mentioned the moratoriums on natural gas line extensions, moratoriums on gas appliances. There's a slide here in a little bit. You've probably read about what's going on in Berkeley and in San Francisco. And Berkeley is the first city that I know of in the country that's basically banned natural gas appliances going forward. And so, you know, these are pretty big, kind of controversial things that are going on in the world. And they always seem to go on the coast first and then eventually come here. And so I'm not advocating these things. I'm just saying I think my job was to kind of share with you all some things that are going on around the country. And those are things that are going on around the country. Those are all things that drive this technology, ultimately, drive it heavily. You see large-scale geothermal communities and or net zero home communities. This is something that is going on around Illinois and has for a long time. So believe it or not, the city of Quincy, which is like the geothermal capital of the world, maybe of the universe to a great extent, at last count, the electric co-op over there, Adams Electric, had served 9 geothermal-only subdivisions in the city of Quincy. It's hard to believe, but they've been at this a long time, and people over there kind of get it. And eventually it kind of builds momentum, believe it or not. And so there are a few of these. There's a couple. There's one that I know of in Bloomington Normal. You all probably saw on the south side, I think down by Oak Lawn, I think on the far south suburbs, somebody has proposed a huge subdivision that will be all solar and geothermal, essentially net zero energy homes. And I don't think they've broken ground on it yet. But this is coming. This is coming down the road. And it has great potential, and there's lots of different ways to structure these kind of communities. But personally, I think that's the future of building and efficiency is, to help promote these types of developments. And then last on the bottom is a loop lease or a loop ownership program. And I only know of one in the state of Illinois, and that's the electric co-op that serves in and around Bloomington Normal. They have a very successful geothermal loop ownership program. It's kind of like a loop lease, and essentially, if you're a member of the co-op and you put in a system, they essentially will pay you for the installation of this, and then you pay it back at $7 a ton. So this one would be $21 a month on your utility bill, and that way you get it cuts the bite of the initial investment a bit, and you're still positive cash flow, that your energy savings way outweigh what you're paying back on that loop. And then eventually, over time, you pay it back. Pretty simple program. They've had a fair amount of success with it. That's a difficult thing for a behemoth utility like Ameren or ComEd to do. That just doesn't fit into their business model. I wish it did. I just don't think it does. I don't know of any big utilities in the country that do that. Electric co-ops are a little more nimble and can do things like that. Unfortunately, they're so much smaller. So, some other incentives and trends. There's currently a movement to extend the 30% federal tax credit for renewable energy and energy efficiency that's being worked on. You might think that that's a long shot. I think it's not as long a long shot as we think, and you'll hear about that next week if you stay till the very end of the conference. Doug Doherty will give a report on where we stand on that, but our industry is working with the solar and wind industries to get a 5-year straight extension on the 30%, because we're currently in the phase out, and it's the deduction is 26%. So there's a move to extend there, and they're fairly confident that we'll do okay with that. So hopefully, incenting decarbonization of buildings. There's 2 competing bills right now. I'm sure you probably know more about them than I do. The Clean Jobs Bill and FEJA and the Path to 100. My personal opinion is that one or the other, and more likely is that they'll smush them together, and I think they get approved this legislative session, and I think the governor signs it. That's my personal opinion, and I might be wrong. I don't think so. I'll bet you $1 it gets approved. So we'd like decarbonization of buildings to be part of what passes into law, and I'm not sure what kind of odds we have of that. That bus is kind of being driven by the solar and wind industry, more so the solar. So, it's a worthy goal. And promoting net zero and geothermal residential and commercial development and use of local codes. Those are all incentives and trends that are starting to go on around the country. Here's a couple things that I just printed out off of the internet. A couple of interesting things here. This is just an article, and you've probably read some of these things. This is about Berkeley, what's going on in Berkeley. Not everybody likes this. And you'll see America's war over natural gas hitting home in New York. Again, not everybody likes this. Interesting reading, though. Lots of stuff online if you go searching for this. New York's natural gas pipeline ban, unconstitutional, bad for the environment, economy, and consumers. That might be debatable, but matter of opinion. This is an interesting article. I read this the other day. It's actually kind of long, from the Union of Concerned Scientists, about what Berkeley is doing. It'll be interesting to see what happens in other communities around the country, to see if this spreads. You may want to read this. This actually, just Google it tomorrow and read it. This is actually a pretty interesting article about what's going on there. This is a really Interesting idea, though, the geothermal and net zero energy subdivisions. There's a big one in Colorado. I don't know a super lot about this one. I've heard about it. It's fairly new. But this one is, I believe, the biggest in the country. It's in Austin, Texas. It's well underway, has been for several years, and it's called Whisper Valley. And if you want to do a little research on this, this is interesting. This is, in time, this won't be a subdivision. This will be its own community. This will be its own town. And it will be all geothermal. And it's a $2 billion sustainable community. And I want to go visit this. This sounds pretty cool, but it's, I don't know how many people have built homes in Whisper Valley already, but I know it's a lot. I've seen some pictures of it. And you know, hundreds and hundreds, and they're only a couple years into this. I think this was fairly new in 2017, and pretty interesting. And this is right off of that same article, and you know, it's not rocket science. It's all existing technology, net zero energy homes with geothermal, solar, and high efficiency appliances and weatherized homes. Pretty simple. You know, you just do it right in the beginning, and you have net zero energy, and you can do it, and you can do it without sacrificing the granite countertops. You really can. So what can a community do? I thought about this a little bit, and I assume that's where you all come in. You know, you can incent local developers, provide tax incentives, encourage. That's probably, you know, the easiest thing you can do. Just encourage and promote community loop concept, community geothermal developments, ownership of the community loop. That's where you'd have one big loop field, one big loop like this in a community, and then everybody just sips off of that. Very efficient, gives you economy of scale. Those are happening. The Whisper Valley has that. I don't know of, do you know of any like that in Illinois? I can ask you a question, can't I, Andy? Do you know of any like that in Illinois? I honestly don't know of any. It's just that hasn't come here yet. But maybe Urbana will be first. And interesting idea. Is that what you all had in mind, I hope? That help at all? And ordinarily there'd be questions, but I get it, there can't be. So I think I gave you my business card. If you do have any questions, reach out to me anytime. And again, if any of you want to come over to our conference, just give me a buzz and I'll take care of your registration. Just let me know. Don't go on, if you go on our website, it's going to charge you money. So just give me a call and I'll take care of you. With that, thank you.